Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers here in the United States of America. Welcome all from across America, Canada, and countries, frankly, around this entire planet. We are receiving emails and messages from people from Europe and Australia and other parts of the world. And that's because of you, our listeners and our viewers, who are spreading the word, and you're sharing these videos from people all over the world. And we thank you for that. Now, folks, we pride ourselves here at Campaign for America on bringing on very distinguished guests who are credible, guests who are articulate, guests who educate us and inform us of the truth of a lot of issues we simply don't understand. Well, I'm proud and honored tonight to introduce to you a very distinguished guest. In fact, I'm fascinated by this gentleman's background. I had a discussion with him before we went on the air, and I think we're going to learn a lot from him tonight, and we're going to be talking about the WHO, the WEF, and the United Nations, which happens to be now the discussion that is taking place at the dinner tables of not only a lot of Canadians, but now a lot of Americans. Because since we've been on the air, I could tell you that the American people were not paying attention to what's going on in Canada, and they are now. And that's a tribute to the Canadian people, who have worked so very hard within the framework of the law to bring to the world the news about what is going on in Canada, which in my view, and I've said this over and over again, has become a clear threat to the national security of the United States, as well as now to the free world. So right now I'm going to introduce you to Matthew Eric. He is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review and a senior fellow at the American University of Moscow. He is the author of The Untold History of Canada book series and Clash of the Two Americas trilogy. In 1990, he co-founded the Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation. Well, I've got to tell you, folks, Matthew, I certainly welcome you to our broadcast this evening.
Thank you for having me on. And just to make a little quick correction, it wasn't 1990, but 2019. Otherwise, I would have been in elementary school.
Well, I'm glad you corrected me because Matthew goes to show me I should have put these things on. Did I say 1990? I said that?
Oh, that's fine. I was alive.
What the heck am I looking at here? Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us. So, Matt, you and I talked a little bit off the air before the broadcast, and I shared with you the fact that those of us around the world, particularly here in America, we need to really get a lot more information and educated with who in the world is the World Economic Forum, what's their goal, what's their mission, as well as the World Health Organization and the United Nations, which it appears to me, and then I'm going to pass it off to you, that it seems like these three organizations truly are working hard to take the sovereignty of our nations away, especially Canada and the United States, which I believe we are the foundation of freedom worldwide.
Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I just tried to correct the focus on my camera. It didn't work. That's okay.
That's okay. We see you. A little fuzzy, but we see you okay.
Okay, I exist here, so it's all right. You're absolutely right. And I mean, a lot of people have been very charged up in the last couple of years, where it's been a big awakening, a big learning curve for many people who have come to recognize that the way the world works is not what they thought. There are actually higher forces above nation states that have exercised a vast amount of control to bring about a very dystopic future, which is very underdefined. There's a massive fight in various countries of the world in opposition to this Great Reset idea. It used to be called New World Order, was the term that George Bush was blabbering about in 1991, 92, and Kissinger and others, and Biden, when he wrote his article saying how I learned to stop worrying and love the New World Order in 1992. That was Joe Biden. And it changed its name a little bit. I think a bit of marketing went into that, and so today it's the new rules-based international order. But it didn't start up, before COVID. It didn't start up in the last 5, 10, 20 years. It didn't start up in 1991 when the Soviet Union melted down. And this became a little bit more loud. This goes back many generations as far as an idea of getting rid of the institution of sovereign nation states. And with the elimination of the sovereign nation state institution to bring about an idea of a unipolar system of supranational governance. And in the post-World War II age, yes, this became the instruments that were selected to advance this agenda took the form of a variety of things. NATO was something created in 1949. Before that, the UN had various aspects. It had some legitimate elements at the UN that enshrined the sovereignty of nations in the UN Charter as sacred, which is good. But the UN, as people know, is a very bureaucratized, overbloated thing, which increasingly got taken over, I think, by those same forces that were funding Hitler, that were funding Mussolini and other fascists as an economic solution to the Great Depression itself, having been caused by a controlled demolition of the U.S. economy in 1929, and the complete shock therapy of 4 years of Great Depression, even longer, which included Canada, it included Europe, was sold to a victimized population as being only solvable by an embrace of fascism, whether Oswald Mosley, whether the Canadian fascist movement, whether the American fascists who were sponsored by J.P. Morgan, which, you could look at Madison Square Garden in the 1940s or 30s even, and there's just Nazi rallies of swastikas and U.S. flags. It's very jarring, 40,000 people at a time coming together because they were, again, beaten down and told this is your only way out of it. And that New World Order agenda failed in the 40s to be carried forth, and they had to change their battle plan and re-strategize, which is what the last 70 years has really been about.
All right, so now we're here in the year 2022. Mm-hmm. It seems to me, and maybe you could help expound upon this a little. I've never seen such an attack against the Canadian people and the American people, if you will, like I have over the past 2 years. Now, look, we've always been under attack. We've always had people looking to disrupt, whether it be elections, whether it be our economy. Nothing like this, and it seems to be a simultaneous attack. And my thought on this is there are two countries on the face of this earth. We're probably the freest of every country on this planet, and it's the United States and Canada. They're coming after our religion. In the United States, they're coming after our weapons, which they're failing miserably, by the way. In Canada, they're coming after the people's right to worship, free speech. I mean, people are being arrested. They're being locked up there. We had some of those problems here. So my question to you is this. Who's orchestrating all this? If, in fact, that's the case. Now, here's where I want to get to. People will hear some of the things that you said and I'm saying. You guys are nuts. There's no conspiracy. There's no big world order. There's no this and there's no that. But what you just articulated was a pretty factual, historical background, perhaps, on why we are where we are today. So now, knowing what you just shared with us, George Soros, Schwab, and others seem to be, well, I'm not going to say seem to be, but they're funding a lot of organizations and involved with a lot of organizations like the World Health Organization, who I think they failed in their meeting a few months ago where they did want to get world leaders together and nobody showed up. But the WEF and the UN, by the way, just so you know, it is the will of, and I know this as a majority of the American people, to throw the UN out on its ears out of New York and out of this country. So let's get to the point where they're getting all the money from, who's funding it, at least to the best of our ability, and who the major characters are in this, because there is a movement. Well, let me ask you this question. Has the movement begun, for lack of a better word, all right, with the unifying of and the creation of the European Union? It seems to me that there's a lot of work going on to take the sovereignty of each country away in Europe. It's yours.
How long is this show again?
Well, we're going to go on. And look, I'm watching the numbers grow, so we're going to go on and let's talk.
All right, all right, because we're opening up some serious cans of worms here. All right, so I guess to parcel out the multifaceted question, what we have right now, if you bring up the question of Klaus Schwab, he's become a bit of a very loud personality for those people within the transatlantic community who are increasingly awake to the reality that there is a nefarious agenda. So Klaus Schwab is a front man, but he's really just that. He's a cardboard cutout front man whose entire career and life has been sort of shaped and handled by controllers to advance an agenda. Schwab himself was, discovered, as you could say, under a CIA-funded program at Harvard in international relations that was overseen by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger himself gets us a little bit closer to a higher upper-level management system. Kissinger, he's the one he himself was knighted in 1993 after Bush Sr. was knighted, given honorary knighthoods by Her Majesty the Queen for good works done throughout the 70s and 80s. And he's the one who said today Americans would be disgusted if an international police force were to come into their country to restore order, but under conditions of a foreseeable crisis that we could manage, they would be embracing and cheering UN affiliated soldiers who would be able to restore order.
Okay, let's take. I want to talk about that point for a minute. That's
Sure.
very interesting.
Okay.
In the United States, we are absolutely opposed and have always been opposed to an international police force. Just about every town, village, community all across America, they have their own police force. So each chief of police, he will conduct the law enforcement methodologies in his community, which can be totally different from somebody else's. So help us understand, help my viewing audience in America understand, does Canada have an international police force? Meaning that when the cops in Toronto are doing something, they're accountable to a higher authority, and the cops across your country on the West Coast are doing something, but they're accountable to the same authority, or are they all separate?
I mean, you have provincial mandates for police forces. Like, for example, there was a positive development earlier on last year when there was an effort made by Doug Ford in Ontario to demand that all police start pulling people over to see if they had a good reason to be outside of their house. And the police of Ontario specifically said collectively, no, we refuse to do this. This is not part of
What was
the
that? I didn't hear it. What was that? Why were they told to pull
Well, this
people
was
over?
during the more heightened phase of the hysteria around lockdown, and people were not supposed to be leaving their houses without good reasons, and so police were being pushed by the government, who had announced the provincial government that that they would be mandated to again pull people over and stop them walking on the side of the street, and make sure that they to basically see their papers. Why are you out? Do you have a good reason?
Wow,
Or
that
do
sounds
we
like
fine you?
that sounds like Moscow when the Soviet Union was
Oh
still in
yeah.
existence.
Yeah, this is. But what was nice to see was that this is one of the few instances where there was a coherent, organized response by the various unions of the police officers of the province, who said together, "No, we're not going to do that." Now, this happened again. They said no. This happened a third time, and then they bent and they said, "Okay, we'll do it," but they didn't follow through. Now, all that to say, you do have, like I said, provincial mandates of police forces, but there is obviously a force above the visible surface thing. What has come to be known deep state in the United States in recent years. There's a very engrossed, enmeshed deep state structure, which is heavily enmeshed within the Privy Council office, within the Prime Minister's office, which were themselves empowered to a very high degree under the first Trudeau tyranny back in the 1970s, in between 68 and 72.
Matt, would
The
you
central points of command for
please
all
define?
the.
Matt, please define for those who are not up to date on this. What is a deep state? People are, they hear about it, they hear the words deep state, they
Yeah,
fully don't understand what it is.
it just means the shadow government, like the real. There's the legitimate component of governments that involve the elected representatives of the people, that are accountable to constitutional mandates. In the case of Canada, it's our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is the closest thing that we have to a genuine constitution. But even that's it's a bit of a shell compared to the U.S., which is much more solid. So you have the legitimate component, which is responsible to the people, and then you have the other thing. So, sometimes people use the term shadow government, sometimes fifth columns, but what you have is a continuity, a multi-generational continuity of power structures embedded within intelligence, within the corporate, even like the private sector, as well as in military affairs, as well as in the bureaucracy of the government, the civil service, what are called the mandarins. No reference to China. It's just a reference of the idea of the Mandarin system of the Qing dynasty. But this is the career bureaucrats, and increasingly, key think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations, set up in 1921 as the American branch of the British Roundtable movement. In Britain, it was called the Chatham House. That's still a central command point. Hillary Clinton refers to CFR as the mothership. This is increasingly taking control of much of U.S. foreign policy. In Canada, we have something called the Canadian International Institute as the Canadian branch of this thing. It's been there since 1928. And Kissinger, who I mentioned earlier, is an early, not a founding, but one of the earliest members of the CFR in the United States that he was assigned to under George Bundy. And his roundtable patron, his teacher, William Yandell Elliott, who ran the Chatham House of Harvard in the 1920s and 30s. So it was under William Yandell Elliott, who himself was a Rhodes Scholar from Oxford, who trained a new generation of technocrats and grand strategists, Kissinger being one, Pierre Elliott Trudeau being another one, Zbigniew Brzezinski being another one, George Bundy being another one, who all went on to shape the contours of the Cold War.
So it's a continuity to develop a power structure within a small group of people, compared to all of us, that will go on to generation after generation, which leads us to, I suppose, where we are today with Trudeau in Canada, with Biden here. It's funny when you talk about the deep state, and I think about the and we don't have facts, and when we don't have facts, we let people know, but sometimes you could connect the dots, and I say this for the benefit of the fact checkers, okay? There is a conclusion that's been drawn here in America that Barack Obama and his team is running this country, that there's your shadow government, that there's your deep state, with regard to all of the appointees that are still in the FBI and the CIA, et cetera. With regard to Trudeau, we believe that he is close to Biden. Trudeau has this bill C-11, which we are vehemently opposing. And next week, I'll share with the listeners and viewers from Canada exactly how we're progressing with that. But Trudeau, we think, gave that idea to Joe Biden, who was going to set up a what they call the Ministry of Truth. And it was shot down in 72 hours. So, and that didn't last long here. But my point is this. What you're saying then is that you have the Klaus Schwabs, you've got the George Soroses, you call them the front men. Behind them then are who? The millionaires, the people with the money. Let's talk about the World Economic Forum.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Share with our viewers, what is the World Economic Forum and what is their mission? Now, and I know I'm jumping all over because, like you say, there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
But talk about something that you all in Canada are very aware of and are beginning to take action on, but what we are still not taking action on, and that is the beginning of what is happening in the Netherlands. Now, is that part of the with regard to the farms, with regard to food distribution, is that part of the mission of the World Economic Forum?
The World Economic Forum, which was set up sort of as a junior branch of the Bilderberger Group. So if, Kissinger is a member of the Bilderberger Group, that gets us a little bit closer to a central command point. It's still itself an organizing body set up by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands in 1955. And a bunch of others. I mean, you could look at the roster of this thing, but this has been a globalist central command point to try to coordinate various fifth columns in various countries around a policy of undermining nations from within, because obviously just battering them from the outside has not worked out so well this has been tried now for centuries. They've not been able to break up the United States through the War of 1812, through the Civil War, which were externally funded wars to destroy the U.S. from the outside. The Frankenstein monster known as Hitler didn't abide by the operating procedures that he was supposed to follow. He basically had an idea of being in charge of the New World Order instead of being a second stringer, being an enforcer for higher powers. So that didn't work out. They had to abort that one. So the Bilderberger Group gets you a little bit closer. The World Economic Forum was set up by Schwab in 1971, around the same time that the U.S. dollar was detached from the gold reserve system by, again, Kissinger and George Shultz in the Nixon administration. They worked very hard at doing that, which was a moment when the U.S. lost its foundation of having an industrial capital economy and turning into what was, you could consider it a consumer society cult. The idea of being a good citizen meant you have to be a good consumer, and we exported our industries And in doing that, for 45, 50 years, we lost our economic sovereignty, the ability to produce for ourselves. And as a consequence, we deregulated the system under especially Thatcherism by the 1980s. And what you had were these same, what George Ball, a Bilderberger leader, had called the world company, was increasingly set up so that the things that national governments used to be responsible for were given over to private cartels that went through mergers, acquisitions to have more power than nations themselves, but were themselves beholden to the same coterie of oligarchical interests who were ultimately not interested in creating wealth or creating value, because they undermined, look at what they did under the World Economic Forum guidance. They undermined America's and even the private sector's ability to create value. We destroyed our own economy. This just to say what I'm getting at here with the destruction of food. What we're seeing now is a tripling down of a process that had already been underway for 50 years, including of agriculture, which has been increasingly turned into biofuels. So 40% of American agriculture, including Canadian, gets burned for biofuel, which is insane when 15,000 children die every day of starvation. But now what they're doing is they're intentionally creating even more scarcity by an artificial destruction of food reserves and food production, buying up of agricultural land by Bill Gates and others, so that they can prepare for ultimately a population reduction. That's ultimately the objective, is to get rid of the excess people, the useless eaters, which is sick, but that's ultimately what they want to do.
Now, do they have any impact in our schools? I'm looking at generation after generation after generation. This didn't happen overnight, but our elementary schools, our colleges, institutions, universities, they're all being influenced by what we call a woke agenda, but an agenda that seems to be in line with the WEF's mission, certainly with the World Health Organization, which is a disaster. I'm looking forward to the Republican Party take control of our Congress in November and completely get the United States out of any relationship with the WHO and hopefully the UN. But I want to get back to this idea. Canadian schools, the American schools, does the WEF have any influence with our educational institutions around Canada, especially, and the United States?
I mean, in the simplest terms, yeah, for sure. It's one homogenous policy across the transatlantic to, the mandate is ultimately, in the simplest way I could say it, is to get rid of create a reset on culture. So they want to create a reset on everything, but they want to cut off the continuity of the values that have sustained Western civilization since the Great Renaissance, of the Golden Renaissance of the 15th century, which was premised on the idea that human beings are made in the image of God, that our value system, our ethical base, our foreign policy, how we organize our identities and our education system have to be formed around the concept of creating whole citizens with matured consciences in alignment with a matured reason, right, that could work together. That was the point of healthy education for most of human history, that whenever it was successful, their job, their assignment is to destroy that, cut off the belief in the family, in the nation state, as well as in God.
All right, let's talk about that's sure. Important, because that's what's happening. Cancel culture is something going on all across North America. Let's talk about that part. That's important. So they want to cancel our culture. They want to change history. They want to be able to distort what our founding fathers here in America and what you all, your founding fathers, if you will, in Canada have put together. So one of the questions that a lot of people have asked me is, maybe you have the answer. So where's our buddy in China in all this? Where's the CCP in this? Where's the Communist Party? It seems to me that they've been quiet, or they're not part of it. And I'm going to ask you a question that is a highly controversial topic. Yeah. I wasn't going to bring this up, but it's important, because I think people need to get some perspective on this. Now, this is not fact, all right? These are some of the things that we're researching and looking at. And I want to talk about Putin for a minute, all right?
Wait,
somebody juicy questions. We mentioned it, but I'm going to be careful with this, because I really want you to come on again. We can talk about it in length, but I'm going to bring him up for a minute.
Sure.
And I'm going to I want to keep focused on Canada and the United States and kind of keep Ukraine out of this. But being that you brought up very articulately the mission of the World Economic Forum, the changing and culture of all that, is it possible that Putin doesn't want to play ball with these guys? Do they see him? Does the WEF see him as a clear threat, as well as not just him, but President Xi in China, vis-a-vis the Communist Party, as a threat to their goals and objectives, which puts Canada and the United States being squeezed? I mean, squeezed by the World Economic Forum, squeezed by the Chinese Communist Party. So how do you see that? I mean, do you think Putin may be a threat to them as well as President Xi? That's why they're focusing on us. I have not heard yet. Maybe I'll hear from you for the first time. I have not heard yet the Chinese Communist Party or Vladimir Putin and and Russia. And again, in my view, I believe he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. I believe he wants to do that as a goal, but only because he believes in his country and he wants to strengthen whatever he feels he has to do to protect his country, as we do in America. So staying away from the war a bit, and we'll get on that some other time. Could it be that Canada and the United States are in the middle of Russia that wants to fight or prevent the WEF from influencing their population? And of course, Communist China don't want anybody to influence their population. Is it possible that that's why we haven't heard much about the WEF and these two other nations?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, Putin is definitely a threat to the overarching agenda. You got to keep in mind that the key thing that the agenda is premised upon as sort of an article of their satanic religious, and I'll say it that I'm using harsh language, but it really is. I mean, when you think is depopulation, the destruction of the means of production that allows humanity to sustain 8 or 9 billion people. They want to get rid of the means of production. This is what the green energy thing is all about. That's what the destruction of food production, as well as some of the medical stuff that we've been seeing, is really driven by, is the idea of reducing the means of sustaining people, and cutting off the continuity of the ancient culture, or the ancient cultures of the world from having any influence upon the next generation, who they want to mold in their image of little human automatons doped up on drugs and stuck on metaverses so that they would be ultimately programmable human machines with no souls. The ideal of the blank slate of John Locke is what they want to create. You know, the idea that you could just, that the master planners can just write and make the video game of life, which is ultimately an offense to reality, because human beings do have a soul. We do live in a universe of law, and they don't want, the oligarchy is in denial. They're in their ivory towers and committed to a false view of what they believe the humanity is.
Matt, are there oligarchs in Russia, because we're hearing a lot about them now, who are supporting the WEF?
There are, yeah, and there are fifth columns in China and Russia that are tied to the WEF. Like, for example, you have Anatoly Chubai, who is a leading founder of the Davos Group in Russia. He recently escaped persecution. February of this year, he left to Turkey. He was the founder. He was the guy who created the oligarchs in the 1990s under the control of the International Monetary Fund, people like Strobe Talbot, Rhodes Scholar under Clinton. He was the one interfacing again with people like Larry Summers and others, and George Soros, big time. George Soros is also big time in China. You know, he had his tool Zhao Ziyang, who became chairman of the Communist Party in 1987, and he co-ran Zhao Ziyang, a think tank with Soros, two think tanks. In 87, he was celebrated as the Yeltsin of China. Now, the interesting thing is, Soros was kicked out of China in 1989 and never allowed by law to enter back into China, and Zhao Ziyang was put into house arrest, where he died 15 years later. His allies, who were also working to create a coup d'etat and completely privatize, like what they did to Russia in the 90s under shock therapy, they wanted to do to China. They were less successful in that sense in China, though there were still remnants and fifth columns that remained behind, but a big chunk of them either went to prison or they escaped and were given sanctuary in New York, Florida, and Vancouver, which is where you get a lot of the Falun Gong expats that have been working to overthrow the Chinese government and subdue it under a one world government, with Jack Ma, for example, being a World Economic Forum young leader and a chairman of the World Economic Forum, not a chairman of trustee. Right. Now, he was another example of somebody who called for an economic regime change in China of last year when he was taken down. So there's a fight between again, the nationalists who don't want to commit harikiri, like mass suicide in Russia and China. And then you have the traitors who are more than happy to balkanize and cut up their countries and reduce their population. And that's a fight that they're doing. We got our fight as well, you know?
You see, what you just articulated to me is this is why on national television here in America last week, I suggested that George Soros should be put on a terrorist watch list, because terrorism not only means that people will ignite explosives or use guns and weapons and mass killings, but you could spread terrorism by funding people who support policies that will certainly terrorize populations. Whether the terrorism is through a physical act or through a political act, it's terrorism.
You can kill more people with the stroke of a pen as a banker for the World Economic Forum than you can with
that saying? The pen is mightier than the sword, right?
Yeah.
So now we've got Russia here, okay? We've got China here. We've got Canada and America in the middle, and we're fighting. We're fighting the best we can with what we have against these entities, and I believe we're going to win. I believe what they did not expect, what these entities did not expect, was the Canadian people and the American people to join together here as one big, massive army. I really don't believe they expected that. I know they didn't expect to see the American people vis-a-vis some of their networks, and I'm talking about big-time television networks and the amount of social media platforms. I'm not the only one in America. I mean, we've got social media networks all over the place now that are spreading the news about what's happening in Canada. Now you're helping us spread the news with regard to what's happening here. So now I'm going to go. I'm going to go to a place I said I wouldn't go, but we're going to touch a little on it. We'll keep the war out of it, but we'll get to that at some point.
Sure.
So we got Russia here with Putin not cooperating with the World Economic Forum because he is a clear threat to their power structure. We got President Xi, who he just wants to take over the entire planet. So he certainly is not going to be a friend with the WEF. And then we have, ready? Then we have the president of Ukraine. Okay. Where's he in all this with the World Economic Forum? Because I must tell you that I have labeled this Joe Biden's war. I believe it is I said I wouldn't go to the war, but I'm just going to define.
We have to just accept the fact that we're going to go there.
Yeah. Joe Biden's war. It's a proxy war between the United States and Russia, with Ukraine, the proxy, if you will. But this guy, Zelensky, am I pronouncing his name? I'm from Brooklyn. I have a tough time pronouncing names at times.
Well, I don't think we're allowed to use the letter Z anymore, so you have to say Zelensky.
Zelensky, okay.
It's been legalized in Germany to use the letter Z.
How about the president of Ukraine? That's easier. Zelensky, if you will. I have very, very deep concerns about the fact that he had to know, as our president knew and others knew, that this idea of his country becoming part of NATO was never going to happen. Never going to happen. We knew it never was going to happen. And yet Joe Biden brings it up and he sticks his finger in the face of Vladimir Putin and he decides, well, we're going to now welcome, or at least introduce, the possibility of Ukraine becoming part of NATO. My question to you is this. If it is a fact, was the WEF or is the WEF anywhere involved in the conflict down there or in the politics as to what is now going on in that part of the world?
Zelensky
in your view.
Zelensky gave a speech at Davos where he said that Ukraine will be the role model for the Great Reset. I mean, the really?
Entire. I didn't know that. That's startling.
I mean, the central bank digital currency system, the motion towards on every single level, Ukraine has been spearheaded to be a sacrificial lamb. I mean, the people itself is what I'm talking about. Zelensky, I don't know to what degree he is aware or not aware of what he is supposed to be doing his entire career. I mean, the guy is an actor. You know, he's not a politician. He has no real skills in the real world for anything. You know, he made his fame playing a president in a comedy show. His entire career has been run by a leading oligarch named Igor Kolomoskoy, who himself is in charge of, support for very nefarious activity, including the bankrolling of the Azov neo-Nazi battalion that was founded in 2014. That was Kolomoskoy, his boss, who runs the biggest media group that has basically bankrolled his career. Kolomoskoy is also one of the key owners through two holding companies in the Cayman Islands of Burisma Holdings, which is where the Biden clan did their graft. Everyone knows about Burisma, right? Where Hunter was on the board getting paid $40,000.
Yeah, I'd like to get that laptop in my hands. I'll tell you.
Yeah, so would a lot of people. But here's the thing, right? It's like you have a system of such hardcore corruption. Zelensky, I think he's a low-level intellect, a useful idiot who's like the world's richest comedian. He's got something like the Pandora Papers demonstrated that he had something to the effect of $600 million to his name in the offshore Cayman Islands accounts. I mean, he's almost a billionaire. It's absurd. But the whole system was put there under the control of Victoria Nuland, who was formerly working under Strobe Talbot in the 90s, overseeing the collapse, the destruction of the Soviet Union, and specifically Russia itself. And after that, she went on to become the assistant for Dick Cheney. She became the U.S. ambassador to NATO. Now, and as of under Obama, she oversaw the overthrow of a legitimate government that was headed towards a pro-Russian policy of economic cooperation. And that was overthrown under a U.S.-led color revolution, utilizing very, very violent neo-Nazis, again, bankrolled by people
that was in Ukraine?
That was in Ukraine, yeah.
Yeah, that's something now. Now, let's talk about that for a minute,
Sure.
All right? Boy, I tell you, folks, I don't keep my word, believe me. I said I wasn't going to go down the road. I tell you, but this is important. This is really important stuff.
Yes, it is.
So now we've got a situation where there was a legitimate election, because I've heard this.
Yeah.
All right. This is the first time I'm hearing it from someone like you, who I trust, who I really trust, that there was an election in Ukraine that was pro-Russian. They elected someone who was pro-Russian, and somehow we got involved, as we always do. We did it in Vietnam. We got involved in the overthrow of the government there, and it ended up in the Vietnam War. So we get involved in this election in Ukraine that was legitimate, and they elected a pro-Russian person. And what happened? We got involved, and Matt, what did we do?
Well, we essentially overthrew. Yanukovych was the name of the president of Ukraine, who wanted to create an economic collaboration with Russia, basically because Ukraine had gone from the richest country per capita in 1989 of all of Eastern Europe. It was the richest, and that includes also most of Western Europe. You would go there for vacation. It had the highest productive power, and it went down over the course of a controlled demolition over 30 years, all the way till 2013, into a basket case of becoming the poorest country with the highest corruption, which is overseen by people like the Clintons, like Obama, like Dick Cheney, and his little coterie of things. And they voted to instead have a policy of a pro-industrial orientation. They said, we're going to pause our integration into the European Union, or the European Economic Zone. And as soon as they did that, Victoria Nuland was in charge of activating the latent groups of neo-Nazis that had been cultivated and grown for the past 20 years prior. Who then unleashed what was called the Revolution of Dignity. But in reality, I mean, something like 90 cops and a bunch of protesters were killed by people that involved, shooters that were not affiliated with either side. They're very shady. Oliver Stone's documentary on Ukraine on Fire from 2016 is a very good assessment of all of this. The key about all of this has been NATO's expansion, because the trophy, when NATO went from 16 countries in 1995 to 30 countries today, the trophy has always been Ukraine and Georgia on Russia's perimeter, because the policy has been, and Putin talked about this in Munich in 2007, full spectrum dominance, absorbing as many countries that were formerly part of the Russian Warsaw Pact and installing anti-Russian missiles controlled by the U.S. military-industrial complex as part of a first strike program to destroy Russia's retaliatory capability and then subdue them under a one world government. To say, you don't have an ability to carry out the program of mutual assured destruction like what ran the Cold War. That's over. Now we can destroy you. And Russia has been aware of this for a long time. China has been aware of this. That's why
I believe Matt Reagan pretty much MAD, mutual assured destruction, to an end when he scared the living daylights out of Gorbachev with Star Wars, with our strategic defense
Yeah, I mean,
initiative.
Reagan was smart. Reagan in 1983, you could see his original speech unveiling the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program, where he originally wanted, it was brilliant. He originally says, in his own words, we should take the billions that we're putting towards building nuclear weapons to kill each other and instead create a mutual defense of humanity.
Yeah.
And he wanted it originally to be Russian and U.S. joint controlled, so that you'd have new discoveries in plasma physics and other lasers that would deactivate any nuclear weapon launched anywhere in the world, making nuclear war strategically impossible. That was brilliant. Unfortunately, at the time, you had Andropov, and then you had Gorbachev, who said no, absolutely not, we don't care. And then it became a bit of a perversion under Bush Senior, who basically just wanted to create it. He basically wanted it just to become tactical with like one like missile hitting another missile, which was itself insane. It has to be based upon cooperation and new technologies like new lasers and fusion. But Matt, it was a good idea. Reagan had a very smart way of thinking about this.
Yeah, he was a great president. Matt, we're running out of time, but here's what I want to do before we run out. Would you please repeat what your website is, okay, a couple of times? Now, folks, if you can't get the website, if you don't pick it up on the air here, obviously you'll be able to rewind this once we post this broadcast, but you go to our website and you ask for his website, we'll get it to you, okay? But we'll put that up in a minute. A couple things before you go, Matt. Number one, for our Canadians watching, Project Maple Leaf is going to be wrapping up its gathering of information, educational material, and research soon. We have a meeting next week where there are 5 areas where we've gathered a lot of information, and we'll be talking about that next Thursday. But we have a fascinating individual who's done hard work. I'm not going to mention her name because I didn't ask her if I could, but she's done extraordinary work on the WEF, and she's building an executive summary that we are going to give to the United States Congress and York Parliament members come November. So she's really done a tremendous amount of work in that area. And the other areas, of course, the excessive use of force by police and 4 or 5 other issues that I know our Congress will be interested in. So we haven't forgot that. We've been quietly moving along, including, Matt, alleged surveillance by your police forces on the Canadian people, and possibly, fact checkers, I'm saying possibly, using U.S. assets on one of those missions, which we're looking into. We're not saying it's a fact. We're looking into that. So we're very well aware of certain things that have been going on in Canada. So Matt, here's what I'd like to do. We're going to wrap things up. I'd like you to share again your website. Also, I'm going to have you back on, definitely. Our numbers, all right, I'm looking at numbers here. I think you can see, but numbers here, very high. So what you touch the chord. You're doing a lot of good here. So before we wrap it up, so now we've identified the problems we're facing, and I'm always asked the question, what do we do about it? And I've shared with the people, and I'm going to ask you to weigh in on it. Get involved, get and elect people, support people that will look after the benefit of all the people, not just a few. And by getting involved, your school districts, your higher institutions of higher education, universities, but politically get involved. People feel helpless, Matt, against all of these millionaires and these powerful people, but they're only as powerful as we let them be. Yeah. So can you help answer the question, what do we do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll do that and also address where people could find my work, because on my website, there are programs for citizens, basically helping to educate an active citizenry to understand the fundamentals of banking reform, foreign policy, economic reconstruction. So that's available on CanadianPatriot.org. You can find a lot of that material. I would say one of the key things here to understand is that we are on the verge of an economic meltdown. It is a controlled demolition in a sense, but at the same measure, it didn't happen overnight. It's been a 50-year program of turning our economy into a giant bubble of speculative debt that itself will be defaulted upon. And if you want to look at what do you do when you're in such a situation, is you have to look at what has been done to stop this same sort of thing from happening in the past. And there were 3 other attempts, and I'm not going to go through them right now because it's a whole discussion unto itself. but there were at least 3 other major attempts in this last century of the 20th century to establish on this earth a post-nation state, depopulated world order. In 1919, under the League of Nations, under 1933, under the London Bankers Conference that attempted to install a global governance of bankers as a dictatorship over nation states, and then a third time with the configuration I alluded to with a fascist New World Order under World War II. All 3 attempts had been subverted by nationalist forces, and it's important that's been written out of our history. We don't get access to this very easily in modern mainstream history books. It's been really scrubbed. So going into a real research, I wrote a book series called The Untold History of Canada, 4 books, as well as 3 books on the Clash of the Two Americas, which goes through this history. And I think looking at what has worked to destroy the oligarchy's foundations of power in the past will help us to at least understand where are the weak points today in the machine, because there are Achilles heels in this evil beast, and it's important just to look at where those are and then see how that also plays into an international context. So that's the simplest way I would say it. It's a little bit roundabout, but again, I'm hoping people check out my website and maybe pick
There
up
it
the
is.
book
You
and
see
read
it,
them.
Matt? You see it? Is it spelled right on the red banner? You see it below our faces?
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
CanadianPatriot.org. That will take you to the website. Correct. Yeah.
Now, Matt, I did that without these. So this is why I asked you to confirm that I did. How's this look, folks?
You did great. That's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, Matt, listen, we're going to have you on again. All right. There's power in knowledge. Knowledge is power, they say, and you've given us a lot of knowledge. And as we move forward, I'm going to have you back. But I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, especially my fellow Americans who are watching these broadcasts on both Mondays and Thursday nights, you might want to go to the CanadianPatriot.org and find out what's going on and what you can do. I like that part where you said you got an action plan for citizens to do what they must to correct our course. So, Matt, that's it. So it was a pleasure to meet you. I'll speak to you again, and thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, folks. Thanks a lot, Matt. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, there we go again. A great patriot, a great lover of freedom and liberty who certainly has a lot of facts. And I'm looking at our numbers here climbing, and all because of you across the country of Canada and the United States. We're getting the word out to people all over the world. And this is great stuff. All right, folks, so we're going to wrap it up. But before we go, campaignforamerica.com. That's our website. I'm going to ask you again, as much as you can, help out, if you could, a contribution of as much as you could, from $1. We've received donations from $1 to the sky's the limit with certain people. And that everything means that you will enable us to fight this good fight that we're fighting, especially here in Canada, here in the United States and Canada, but especially in Canada more than probably any other country right now in the free world, because at least here in the United States, we've got light very soon at the end of the tunnel, and that's November. There'll be some big changes here. So we must focus our foreign policy on Canada come after November. This is why Project Maple Leaf is being put together now. It's going to be ready to go to every single new congressional representative in November. And hopefully, prayerfully, we're going to do a lot of great things to help the Canadian people without interfering, as some people have accused us of, with the Canadian government, your internal affairs. I'm not interested in getting involved with that government up there. We're going to work as hard as we could to help the people of Canada preserve their freedom and liberty as we are fighting the Chinese Communist Party. That's how important it is to us. We haven't lost our freedoms and liberties as the people in Canada have. And the people in the United States don't know or are unaware. At least we're unaware up until the time many of us have taken to the airwaves and spread the word. So we need your help. If you go to campaignforamerica.com, you'll see a bar that says donations or contributions. We ask that you help us out. And we'll have more guests on, like Matt and others from Canada, who could give us some real life first person stories as to what's going on there. Boy, I'll tell you, God's blessed this work that all of we are doing, you and us. It's a true partnership. So, folks, thank you for joining us tonight. And let's keep our countries in prayer. And remember, I've said this quite often, the chief end of man is what? To love and glorify God forever, because through all the things we say and do, God is still in the mix. Thank you. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. Have a good night.